It's December 2013. My name is Paul. Today I'm going to be changing one of the boots on one of my trusty dry suits. Before a project like this gets started, one of the first things you need is a new pair of boots. A good quality neoprene cement, I like this stuff. Needle and thread for the very tedious part. A good quality sealer. I find this stuff is pretty close to what we commonly see on the inside seam seals of dry suits. And we also need an alignment tool, which in my case today is going to be a couple rolls of duct tape. This is what I'll be doing with the rolls of duct tape. You can see where I'm going with that. It'll help me line up the suit when I glue the boot on. The suit we're going to be working on today is a 1/4-inch neoprene dry suit. I like them uncrushed and extra large. It suits well for what we do. The first step here is that we're going to be cutting the old boot off. Now, what I want to do is I want to cut just above, the suit's upside down, just above the stitching line where this new boot is going to go on. I want my cut on my dry suit to be as clean or better than the cut that's on the new pair of boots. For this, I'm going to start with an X-Acto knife just to puncture this suit, and then I'm going to carry on with a good pair of scissors and try to get a nice clean cut all the way around. Alright, so I've cut my boot off. In this case, my suit happens to be sitting on a dryer. I dried it before I did this work. Not everybody has a dryer. Maybe later on I'll do a little video on how to make a cheap dryer. But now I'm throwing away my old boot. I had a couple problems with it. One of them I managed to fix right here, where the sole of my boot had delaminated from the shell. I guess they come in layers, and I was getting water in between my rubber and the neoprene inside. Well, that's no good in the winter because you have the water that collects there and then it freezes. Now you have a buildup of ice in the sole of your boot, even though it's dry inside your suit. It's still pretty freaking cold and uncomfortable on your foot. I was able to, it's kind of dirty right now, but I was able to seal that up with some of that same 3M5200 glue. That lasted for a long time. Actually, it's still lasting. The problem after that is that this stitch seam at the back of my boot above the molded rubber was leaking, and I wasn't able to seal that up. So then it was time to change this boot out. I'm going to concentrate on just one boot for now, make sure that it's good. I'm not going to cut them both off at the same time. Alright, next it's time for gluing. Neoprene cement, which acts pretty much like a contact cement. Which means that you pretty much got one shot at it, so you got to think about it a little bit. First thing we do is read the instructions. There we go. You put on, make sure everything's clean and dry. You put on one coat on the surfaces to be bonded. You allow it to wait 5 minutes. Apply another coat to one side, wait 10 minutes, and then you press them together. So the instructions are fairly simple. Now, you got to think about it methodically because you want to get it to touch all in one shot. So, here inside the boot is a roll of duct tape. That's just going to hold it nice and round. And then on the suit itself, there's a mating roll of duct tape. Right now I was just holding it open to help me get the glue on. Then I'll position everything and I'll move the rolls a little bit to help me line them up, which you'll see. Okay, so I put one coat of cement on. I should point out that is the actual thickness of the material that we're joining together. We're not overlapping materials one over the other. That's a no-no. we're gluing the neoprene material itself. So I've got one coat of cement on here. It's kind of hard to see, I guess. I'm going to give it a couple minutes to dry. I've noticed that on my dry suit, the older neoprene is pretty porous, so it pretty much absorbed right in right away. So I'm going to probably put a second coat on both sides of the suit, because I personally think it'd be prudent. Alright, I'm getting ready to line up my boot. So, again, I'm using my dryer just because I happen to have it. You don't need it there. You can do this on the ground. I've pulled my suit up on the dryer a little bit so that the boot's not in the way. There's not going to be putting tension on it. I did that just by flipping the boot over on the other side. And the rigidity of the suit's keeping it up. I've also got a clamp to give it a little bit more so I can push down on it. You can see that I've got the roll of duct tape pushed in a little bit. So what I'm going to do is leave it like that, and then on the boot itself, I'm going to let it protrude a little bit as I line it up. It's getting nice and tacky now, so it's just about ready. The only other thing I got to watch out for is I'm going to line the seam seal in the back of the suit with the seam seal in the back of the boot, just like the old one, so that the foot's pointing in the right direction. And it's a simple matter. As soon as it touches, you squeeze it together. You don't try to pull it apart, so you make sure you line it up right the first time. So here we are, I'm ready to go. I got the rolls of duct tape helping me keep everything spaced out enough. I'm going to need both hands, so I'm going to end up putting the phone down for my final fit. But you can see that this is a pretty simple way to line things up. Even if you don't have a tube inside, like I said, you could do this on the floor or in between your knees. But basically now it's just a matter of once you make sure your glue is at the right tackiness, you've waited your full 10 minutes, then you just start squeezing it together, and then once you get it to touch, then you squeeze the neoprene in. I didn't say it before, but you have to be careful not to slop glue on the rolls of duct tape inside so that they are still free to move as you're lining stuff up. Here we go. And the bond is complete. So now, what I'm going to do is put the phone down again, and I'm going to put pressure with one hand as I go around and I pinch the material together. I'm going to work it my way around a couple times, making sure that I got a nice good bond. Basically, I'm getting air out of the seams, but there's no pulling it apart now. The bond is done. So once I've satisfied that I squeeze it together as much as I can, I'm going to take it off of the dryer, lay it on the floor, and I'm going to begin the tedious task of sewing. Alright, I got my suit on my basement floor now. Looking at the bond that we just did, that is a beautiful bond. Nicely aligned. Oops, there we go. And you can see it's not pulling away because we got our glue settings just right. So now, just to be sure, I'm going to keep on pinching it together in an attempt to drive some air out, but I'm pretty sure that it's as good as it's going to get. And then we're going to start sewing it. Now sewing, get to that in a moment. Here's the other new boot. This is the deal with sewing. Alright, so you got a 1/4 inch of neoprene, which is your insulating factor. You have an outside material laminated on the neoprene, and you have an inside material laminated on the neoprene. When you're sewing, the only thing you're sewing is this outside laminated material. You are not sewing through the neoprene. Kind of defeats the purpose because it's a bunch of pinholes, right? So get yourself comfortable because you have to sew just this material. You can come back 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch if you want. It doesn't really matter as long as you don't drive your needle through the neoprene to the other side, either on the boot or on the suit above it. So you're just sewing the outside material with a needle and thread. This could take you a long time. If you're no good at that stuff, you can get somebody else to help you. But do not sew through your boot. Okay, so I've begun sewing, In hindsight, I should have used a different color thread for the purpose of this video, but I didn't. So this is basically what you're going to do. And in my case, I'm going to follow this all the way around the boot, and then I'm going to come back on it because I want the stitch to go the other way. If you're too lazy to do that, that's up to you. We can see where the needle is going through right here. Its material is still fairly flat. I don't have a huge hump in it. It is actually easy to sew just through the material without going right through all the neoprene. It just takes a long time. So the next clip will be when this is completely finished. Okay, the suit's back on the dryer, only for ease of making this video. You can see where I've sewn my seam. It took me 90 minutes to go around it. I went one way, all the way around, and then came back the other way. So it ends up being an X-shaped sewing pattern. Not too bad a job, if I do say so myself. But I do compare my sewing job to the factory sewing job. And you can see that mine is still a little not in comparison. There's not as much stitching there. So the next phase of this boot replacement is going to be seam sealing. And I'm going to show you what's the factory did on the inside of the boot. And we're going to do it on both the inside and the outside. So when I'm done, I'll have seam sealed the outside of the dry suit as well. This is the old boot. You can see where the old sewing was, and then on the inside they have this rubberized seam sealing material. I've never been able to find out what it is. Apparently it's a couple part mixture, but I found something that's similar and works fairly well. And that's where this stuff comes in. The only problem with this stuff is that it takes 7 days to cure. So you have to make sure you do this when you don't need your suit for a little while. I should point out too that if you change only one boot and not the other, then effectively you've cut about ½ an inch off your suit. It doesn't matter for a suit like this, where in my case it's an extra large suit. Anybody with a custom fit suit, it might be more of an issue. I don't believe in custom fit suits in the first place. You need to have lots of airspace for insulation and for safety. Alright, now finished product. I've got some 3M 5200 smeared around the outside of my sewn seam. That's going to protect it because my sewing is not quite as good as factory sewing, machine sewing. I was not, in fact, able to turn my suit inside enough to seam seal the inside, so it just got done on the outside. I happen to have a leftover caulking tube of that 3M 5200, so I didn't use a squeeze tube, and that explains why I was able to get such a beautiful bead of it. But if you smear it on by fingers out of the 3-ounce tube, this works just as well. So now the suit's got to stay here for 7 days in the warmth without freezing, and then it'll be good to go. That's the end of that.